There exists within the human soul a song so beautiful, so achingly familiar, that we mistake its melody for love itself. Yet this is not the music of authentic connection. It is the siren's call of our deepest wounds, singing us toward the rocks of repetition where countless souls have shattered before us. Listen closely to the waters of your own becoming. Can you hear it? That haunting refrain that rises from the depths of your unconscious, calling you toward relationships that feel like destiny but taste like déjà vu. This is where we begin our descent into the shadow realm of false intimacy, where the psyche plays elaborate tricks upon itself, dressing trauma in the wedding garments of true love. The wounded child within you recognizes this song immediately. It is the lullaby of chaos, the familiar rhythm of abandonment and return, the sweet agony of never quite being enough. Your nervous system, that ancient oracle of survival, knows this pattern as intimately as your own heartbeat. It was written into your very cells during those tender years when love and pain became so intertwined that you could no longer distinguish between them. Jung understood this profound deception of the psyche. He saw how the ego, in its desperate hunger for connection, will choose the familiar over the nourishing, the dramatic over the peaceful, the addictive over the authentic. The persona, that carefully constructed mask we show the world, learns to dance with shadows, convincing itself that this dance is love's highest expression. But what calls to you in these treacherous waters is not love at all. It is the unconscious, mind's compulsive need to heal through repetition, to somehow make right the original wound by finding someone who will wound you in precisely the same way. The psyche believes in its innocent wisdom that if it can just get the story right this time, if it can just love perfectly enough, give completely enough, surrender thoroughly enough, then finally, it will receive the love it was denied in the beginning. This is the great illusion that keeps souls trapped in the amber of their own becoming. The ego constructs elaborate fantasies around these relationships, weaving mythologies of destiny and soulmates and cosmic connection. Yet beneath these beautiful stories lies a more humble truth. You are not connecting with another human being at all. You are connecting with the ghost of your own unlived life, the phantom of your own unhealed wounds. The siren's song grows stronger as you approach the rocky shores of trauma bonding. Your body knows, oh how your body knows, that this is not safe harbor. Your nervous system floods with ancient warnings. Your dreams become prophetic. Your intuition screams through the static of your own desire. Yet the wounded child within you, that part of your psyche that never learned to trust its own wisdom, drowns out these warnings with its desperate crying. "This is it," the child whispers. "This is the love I've been waiting for." But the child cannot distinguish between the familiar and the healing, between the past and the present, between the wound and the medicine. The child only knows that this feeling, this intoxicating mixture of pain and pleasure, hope and despair, is the feeling it has always associated with love. The ego, ever the loyal servant of the wounded child, begins its alchemical work of transformation. Red flags become romantic gestures, inconsistency becomes passion, emotional unavailability becomes mysterious allure. The mind becomes a masterful artist, painting pretty pictures over ugly truths, creating elaborate tapestries of meaning where there is only the raw material of repetition. This is not love. This is the shadow of love, the photographic negative of authentic connection. Where real love brings integration, this brings fragmentation. Where real love brings peace, this brings chaos. Where real love brings you home to yourself, this takes you further and further away from your own center, your own truth, your own capacity for genuine intimacy. The siren's call promises everything the soul truly desires: to be seen, to be known, to be chosen, to be enough. yet it delivers only the familiar prison of childhood dynamics, dressed in adult clothing. The jailer wears the face of a lover, the prison bars are made of promises and potential, and the cell is decorated with the beautiful lie that this time will be different. Jung called this the compensatory function of the psyche, how the unconscious mind attempts to balance conscious attitudes through their opposite. The more desperately we seek love, the more powerfully we attract its shadow. The more we hunger for connection, the more we magnetize disconnection disguised as intimacy. The more we yearn for healing, the more we draw to ourselves the very wounds we seek to heal. And so the soul finds itself caught in the eternal return, sailing these same waters again and again, answering the same siren's call, crashing upon the same rocky shores. The ego tells itself that this is simply bad luck, poor timing, wrong people. But the deeper truth whispers from the depths. Until you learn to distinguish between the song of your wounds and the music of your healing, you will continue to sail these treacherous waters, mistaking the siren's call for love's true voice. Tito, time has come to listen more carefully, to hear beneath the beautiful melody, the grinding of bones against rocks, the cries of those who have sailed these waters before you. The time has come to recognize that what you thought was love calling you home may actually be trauma calling you back to the scene of the original crime, hoping this time to get the story right. In the grand theater of the wounded psyche, there exists a stage where love performs its cruelest deception. Here, beneath the velvet curtains of romantic longing, the soul becomes both audience and actor in a play that never ends, never satisfies, yet never allows the viewer to leave. This is the theater of intermittent reinforcement, where affection arrives not as the steady sunrise of authentic love, but as lightning, brilliant, unpredictable, and followed always by the rumbling darkness of withdrawal. The psychology of this theater is ancient and merciless. Just as the casino designer understands that the occasional jackpot creates more addiction than consistent winning, the wounded psyche learns to crave the random pellet of affection more desperately than any steady nourishment could inspire. Your dopamine pathways, those chemical highways of desire, become programmed for intermittence. The brain literally rewires itself to find the unpredictable more compelling than the reliable, the scarce more valuable than the abundant. But this is not the brain's original sin. This is the brain's adaptive response to an environment where love was rationed, where affection was currency controlled by another's mood, where your very worth was subject to the whims of giants whose own wounds dictated the emotional weather of your world. The child within you learned to find excitement in uncertainty because uncertainty was the only constant. Learned to find passion in pain because pain was love's most frequent messenger. Watch how the theater operates. Act 1 opens with withdrawal. Subtle at first, perhaps. The text messages become shorter, the phone calls less frequent. The eyes that once held you like sacred scripture now glance away as if reading something far more interesting. Your nervous system, that exquisite early warning system, begins to sound its alarms. But you have learned not to trust these warnings. You have learned to call this feeling butterflies, to mistake your body's distress signals for the flutter of romantic excitement. The curtain falls on Act 1 with you questioning everything: your worth, your perception, your sanity. Did you imagine the closeness? Were you too needy, too much, too something? The ego scrambles to make meaning from chaos, to find patterns in randomness, to discover what you might have done wrong, to shift the tide of affection. This is the intermittent punishment that teaches the soul to blame itself for another's inconsistency. Act 2 arrives like a thunderclap of redemption. The withdrawal ends as suddenly as it began. The phone rings with promises, the eyes return with intensity, the words flow like honey mixed with wine. "I missed you," they say, and your dopamine receptors flood with relief so profound it feels like salvation itself. This is the intermittent reward that teaches the soul to forgive anything for the mere possibility of love's return. But notice what has happened in this carefully choreographed dance of approach and withdrawal. You have learned to associate intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion, relief with love. Your nervous system no longer recognizes the steady rhythm of authentic affection. It has been trained to crave the dramatic swing from famine to feast, from abandonment to rescue, from despair to euphoria. This is not love. This is biochemical manipulation disguised as romance. The intermittent reinforcement schedule creates the strongest behavioral conditioning known to psychological science. Rats will press a lever delivering random rewards far longer and far more obsessively than rats receiving consistent rewards. The human heart, it turns out, is not so different from the rat's desperate pour, pressing again and again for the unpredictable pellet of affection. Jung understood that the psyche seeks to complete its unfinished business through compulsive repetition. If love came irregularly in childhood, if it was something to be earned, lost, and earned again, then the unconscious mind will seek partners who offer love on precisely the same irregular schedule. The wound seeks its perfect match, and inconsistency calls to inconsistency across the crowded room of human connection. The tragedy deepens when you begin to mistake your addiction for devotion, your obsession for commitment. The very intensity of your craving becomes proof in your mind of love's authenticity. If I didn't love them so much, you tell yourself, why would I feel so desperate when they pull away? But this logic is the logic of the addict, who mistakes withdrawal symptoms for evidence of true need. Real love does not operate on the stock market model of artificial scarcity. Authentic affection flows like a river, sometimes deeper, sometimes shallower, but always present, always moving in the direction of nourishment. It does not arrive in hoarded bursts designed to keep you grateful for crumbs. It does not vanish mysteriously, only to return with explanations that explain nothing. The theater of intermittent reinforcement trains the soul to find steady love, boring, predictable love, suffocating, consistent love somehow less than the dramatic peaks and valleys that have become your definition of passion. You learn to interpret someone's emotional availability as evidence that they must not really love you, because if they did, wouldn't they be inconsistent? Wouldn't they be mysterious? Wouldn't they keep you guessing? This is the cruelest deception of all, teaching the heart to reject its own healing. The psyche becomes so addicted to the chemical cocktail of intermittent affection that it literally cannot recognize authentic love when it appears. Kindness feels foreign, consistency feels suspicious, and genuine care feels somehow less real than the manufactured drama of approach and withdrawal. The curtain never falls on this theater because there is no resolution to be found in repetition. There is only the endless cycle of withdrawal and return, each performance leaving the soul a little more depleted, a little more convinced that love is something that must be chased rather than received, earned rather than given, hoarded rather than shared, until you recognize the theater for what it is, not a love story, but a trauma story dressed in romantic costumes. You remain forever in the audience, applauding your own imprisonment, mistaking the chains for jewelry, the cage for a cocoon. There is a terrain in the landscape of false intimacy where the ground itself becomes your enemy, where each step forward might be the one that sends you plummeting into the abyss of another's rage or silence. This is the quicksand of walking on eggshells, where the authentic self begins its slow suffocation beneath the weight of perpetual performance, where spontaneity dies and calculation takes its place at the altar of connection. In the shadow realm, you learn to read the atmospheric pressure of another's mood with the precision of a meteorologist. The slight tightening around their eyes becomes a storm warning. The pause before they speak becomes a tornado watch. The quality of their silence, for you learn there are many different silences, each with its own threat level, becomes the barometer by which you navigate each moment of each day. Your nervous system, that ancient guardian of survival, shifts into a state of perpetual hypervigilance. Every conversation becomes a chess match, where you must think 3 moves ahead, anticipating not just what you want to say, but how it might be interpreted, misinterpreted, weaponized, or used as evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. Your words, once the natural expression of your inner world, become carefully curated offerings placed upon the altar of another's instability. This is not the conscious choice of a strategic mind. This is the unconscious adaptation of a psyche that has learned that love is conditional upon perfection, that connection requires the complete erasure of anything that might disturb another's fragile equilibrium. The ego, in its desperate hunger for belonging, begins the systematic dismantling of authenticity, piece by precious piece. Watch how the transformation occurs. In the beginning, you might catch yourself mid-sentence editing your thoughts in real time to avoid potential conflict. I was going to say this, you think, but perhaps that would be better. Soon, the editing happens before the thoughts even form. The authentic impulse to share excitement, to express disappointment, to voice a preference, dies in the womb of self-censorship before it can draw its first breath. Jung understood this process as the pathological development of the persona, that mask we wear to navigate the social world. In healthy relationships, the persona serves as a bridge between inner truth and outer expression, allowing us to share ourselves appropriately while maintaining our essential nature. But in the quicksand of trauma bonding, the persona becomes not a bridge but a prison, not a tool for connection, but a mechanism of self-betrayal. Your authentic responses, the laugh that comes too loud, the opinion that differs from theirs, the moment of sadness that might dampen their mood, become classified as dangerous contraband. You learn to smuggle your real self through checkpoints of approval, hiding your truth in the false bottom of acceptable emotions. The customs agents of this relationship inspect every authentic impulse, confiscating anything that might threaten the precarious peace. The quicksand is not just the external demand for perfect behavior, it is the internal transformation that occurs when you begin to police yourself with the same hypervigilance once reserved for external threats. You become both the prisoner and the guard, the surveilled and the surveiller. Your own authentic impulses become foreign invaders, to be neutralized before they can disturb the carefully maintained ecosystem of another's comfort. This is where the soul begins its slow suffocation. Authenticity requires air to breathe, the oxygen of genuine expression, spontaneous response, unedited truth. But in the quicksand of eggshell navigation, this air becomes too dangerous to breathe. Each authentic exhale might shatter the fragile peace. Each genuine response might trigger the earthquake of another's emotional volatility. The tragedy deepens when you discover that your careful performance, your meticulous attention to their emotional weather patterns, your sacrificial offering of your own truth, does not actually create the safety you seek. The eggshells continue to break, seemingly at random. The storms come despite your best meteorological predictions. The quicksand continues to pull you deeper, despite your increasingly frantic efforts to find solid ground. This is because you are not actually walking on eggshells at all. You are walking on the unstable ground of another's unhealed wounds. No amount of careful stepping can stabilize what was never solid to begin with. No degree of self-editing can create safety with someone who is fundamentally unsafe, not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious of their own capacity for emotional violence. Jung would recognize this as the dissolution of individual boundaries, not the healthy dissolution that occurs in authentic love, where two whole beings choose to merge temporarily while maintaining their essential selfhood. But the pathological dissolution where one person disappears entirely into the emotional landscape of another, this is not union, but absorption, not love, but obliteration. The authentic self, deprived of expression, begins to atrophy like a muscle unused. Your preferences become uncertain, your opinions become malleable, your very sense of self becomes negotiable. You wake up one day and realize you no longer know what you actually think, feel, or want, because these have become secondary to the primary directive of maintaining another's emotional equilibrium. The quicksand teaches you to mistake hypervigilance for love, self-erasure for devotion, survival for intimacy. You learn to call your anxiety caring deeply, your loss of self, being considerate, your chronic state of walking on eggshells, being sensitive to their needs. The soul knows better. It recognizes this as spiritual suffocation. But the voice of authentic knowing becomes fainter and fainter beneath the noise of perpetual performance. This is not love's natural territory. Love does not require the death of authenticity as the price of admission. Love does not demand that you become a ghost of yourself in order to deserve connection. Love does not transform the ground beneath your feet into quicksand, where every natural movement becomes a potential catastrophe. True love creates solid ground where authenticity can flourish, where your genuine responses are welcomed rather than weapons, where the eggshells dissolve because there was never any real fragility to protect. Only the beautiful, resilient truth of two whole beings choosing to share their wholeness. But first, you must recognize the quicksand for what it is, not love's testing ground, but trauma's theater of operations, where the self learns to sacrifice itself on the altar of another's unhealed wounds. In the hidden laboratory of the wounded psyche, there exists an alchemy so sophisticated, so artfully crafted, that it would make the medieval masters of transmutation weep with envy. Here, in the crucible of desperate love, the mind performs its most tragic magic, the transformation of poison into medicine, cruelty into kindness, abandonment into romance. This is not the philosopher's stone that turns lead into gold. This is something far more dangerous. This is the psychological sleight of hand that turns trauma into treasure, convincing the soul that its own destruction is actually its salvation. Watch the master alchemist at work. The raw materials arrive daily: neglect, inconsistency, emotional cruelty, broken promises, base metals of human behavior that any healthy psyche would recognize as toxic. But the wounded mind has learned a different kind of chemistry. It takes these poisonous elements and begins the elaborate process of transmutation, adding the catalysts of hope, the solvents of longing, the heat of desperate need, until something entirely different emerges from the alchemical fire. "They're just going through a difficult time," whispers the alchemist mind, stirring the cauldron of justification. The neglect becomes evidence of their depth, their complexity, their mysterious inner world. "They're not like other people," the mind continues, adding another ingredient to the mixture. "They love differently, more intensely, more authentically than those who offer mere consistency and care." This is where Jung's concept of the shadow reveals its most insidious operation. The shadow knows, oh how it knows, what healthy love looks like. It has seen it in movies, read about it in books, witnessed it in the relationships of others. But the shadow also knows that acknowledging this truth would require confronting the original wound, that tender scar tissue formed in the earliest years when love and pain became so intertwined that they could not be separated. The alchemical process begins with the simplest transmutations. Their silence becomes mysterious rather than withholding. Their criticism becomes evidence of their high standards rather than cruelty. Their unavailability becomes proof of their importance, their busyness, their significance in a world that demands their attention. Each red flag is carefully processed through the psychological laboratory until it emerges bearing the chemical signature of romantic virtue. But as the relationship progresses, the alchemy must become more sophisticated. The mind develops increasingly elaborate formulas for transmutation. Their anger becomes passion. After all, don't they always say that the line between love and hate is thin? Their jealousy becomes evidence of how much they care. Surely someone who didn't love you wouldn't be so concerned about losing you. Their control becomes protection. Their manipulation becomes guidance. Their emotional abuse becomes the rough love of someone who sees your potential and refuses to let you settle for less. The wounded psyche becomes a master storyteller, weaving narratives of such complexity and beauty that they could rival the greatest myths of human civilization. Every cruel word becomes a misunderstood truth. Every broken promise becomes evidence of their struggle with a world that doesn't understand their sensitive nature. Every moment of emotional abandonment becomes a test of your love, a challenge to prove your devotion worthy of their eventual return. Jung understood that the psyche has an almost infinite capacity for self-deception when the truth threatens the ego's fundamental organizing principles. If you learned in childhood that love comes with pain, that care arrives wrapped in cruelty, that attention must be earned through suffering, then a relationship that offers genuine kindness becomes psychologically intolerable. It doesn't match the template. It doesn't feel like the love you learn to recognize. The alchemy serves another, deeper function. It protects the ego from the devastating recognition that it has chosen its own destruction. To acknowledge that the person you love is actually harmful would require acknowledging that your choosing mechanism itself is broken, that your compass for love points always toward your own wounding. This recognition feels too dangerous, too threatening to the ego's sense of competence and wisdom, so the mind doubles down on its alchemical work. It develops increasingly sophisticated theories about their behavior. They're an artist, and artists are temperamental. They're highly intelligent, and intelligent people are often misunderstood. They've been hurt before, and hurt people hurt people. They're working on themselves, going through a transformation, dealing with family issues, processing childhood trauma. The list of extenuating circumstances grows longer and more elaborate with each passing day. The most tragic aspect of this psychological alchemy is how it transforms the alchemists themselves. In the process of constantly transmuting poison into medicine, the psyche begins to lose its natural ability to distinguish between the two. The internal warning systems, intuition, gut feelings, bodily sensations of danger, are systematically overridden by the intellectual process of justification. The soul's natural immunity to toxicity is compromised by repeated exposure to poison disguised as nourishment. This is not conscious deception. The wounded psyche genuinely believes in its alchemical creations. It has convinced itself so thoroughly that poison is medicine that it begins to crave the very substances that are slowly killing it. The mind learns to interpret the symptoms of poisoning, anxiety, depression, loss of self-worth, chronic confusion, as evidence that the medicine is working, that the transformation is taking place, that love is simply more challenging and profound than others realize. The shadow whispers its deepest secret, that to abandon this alchemical practice would mean confronting the original wound, that primal hurt that taught the psyche to accept crumbs as banquets, poison as medicine, destruction as devotion. The known pain feels safer than the unknown healing, the familiar poison more trustworthy than unfamiliar nourishment. But alchemy, true alchemy, is not about transforming poison into medicine through elaborate mental gymnastics. True alchemy is about transforming the alchemists themselves, learning to recognize poison as poison, medicine as medicine, and choosing consciously which substances to invite into the sacred vessel of the soul. The laboratory of the wounded psyche must eventually be abandoned, its sophisticated equipment of justification set aside, its elaborate formulas of transmutation released. Only then can the real work begin. Not the transformation of poison into medicine, but the transformation of the wounded alchemist into a being capable of recognizing and choosing true nourishment. In the vast desert of trauma bonding, there appears an oasis that promises everything the thirsty soul desires: love, understanding, completion, home. But as you approach this shimmering vision, drawn by its irresistible pull, you discover too late that it is a mirage. And in your singular focus on this phantom oasis, you have wandered so far from the real sources of nourishment that when you finally turn around, the green valleys of authentic connection have vanished beyond the horizon. This is the mirage of isolation, where the psyche becomes so consumed by one relationship that all others fade into insignificance. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the gentle erosion that eventually carves canyons through solid rock. A dinner with friends canceled because they need you. A family gathering missed because it would upset them. A hobby abandoned because it takes time away from the relationship. Each choice seems reasonable in isolation, but together they form a pattern that slowly severs every lifeline, except the one that leads back to your source of trauma. Jung recognized this as the shadow's most insidious strategy, the gradual isolation of the psyche from the collective sources of wisdom that might threaten the neurotic pattern. Friends, with their outside perspective, might notice what you cannot see. Family, with their long view of your history, might remember who you were before this relationship reshaped you. Colleagues, mentors, spiritual communities, all these connections carry the dangerous possibility of reflection, of mirrors that might show you truths you are not ready to see. The gravitational pull of trauma bonding is unlike anything in the natural world. It operates not according to the laws of physics but according to the laws of psychological compulsion. The more toxic the relationship becomes, the stronger its gravitational field grows, pulling you deeper into its orbit while simultaneously pushing away everything else that might offer alternative perspectives, competing loyalties, or, most dangerous of all, genuine nourishment. Watch how the isolation unfolds. At first, you make conscious choices to prioritize this relationship above others. It feels romantic, devoted, proof of your commitment and their importance. You begin to see your other relationships through the lens of this primary bond, and they start to feel somehow less real, less significant, less worthy of your time and energy. Why would you want to spend an evening with friends when you could be with your beloved? Why would you invest in family relationships when you have found your soulmate? But gradually, the choice becomes less conscious and more compulsive. Your other relationships begin to feel foreign, like clothes that no longer fit. Conversations with friends feel shallow compared to the intensity of your primary relationship. Time spent with family feels like time stolen from where your heart truly belongs. The normal rhythms of human connection, the casual lunch, the spontaneous phone call, the comfortable silence of old friendships, begin to feel artificial, performative, somehow less authentic than the drama and intensity of your consuming bond. This is where Jung's understanding of individuation becomes crucial. Healthy individuation requires connection with the collective, the rich web of relationships that reflect back different aspects of the self, that challenge and support and witness the full spectrum of human experience. But trauma bonding creates a kind of pseudo-individuation, where the self appears to be choosing its own path, but is actually being drawn into an increasingly narrow orbit around another's psychological pathology. The mirage promises that all your needs for connection, understanding, and love can be met by this one person. It whispers that other relationships are distractions, that true love means finding someone who is everything to you: friend, lover, family, mentor, audience, mirror. This is not integration, but fusion. Not love, but absorption. Not choice, but compulsion disguised as devotion. As the isolation deepens, you begin to lose touch with the parts of yourself that existed in those other relationships. The version of you that laughed with college friends disappears. The aspect of yourself that felt confident in professional settings fades. The part of you that found joy in solitary pursuits withers. These aspects of self don't die suddenly. They undergo a slow starvation, deprived of the relational nutrients that once fed them. The world shrinks until it contains only two people, and even then it really contains only one, the gravitational center around whom your entire existence orbits. You'd lose your independent interests, your separate social connections, your autonomous decision-making capacity. What you call love has actually become a form of psychological house arrest, where the walls are invisible but impermeable, where the cell door is unlocked but you have forgotten that you once possessed the key. The cruelest aspect of this isolation is how it masquerades as intimacy. You tell yourself that this is what real love looks like. Two people so connected that they don't need anyone else. So complete together that the rest of the world becomes irrelevant. But this is not intimacy. This is enmeshment. Not connection, but entanglement. Not love, but the mutual imprisonment of two wounded souls who mistake their cage for a cocoon. Jung understood that the psyche, when caught in pathological patterns, will sacrifice everything to maintain those patterns, even when the cost is the slow death of the authentic self. The trauma bond requires isolation to survive, because exposure to healthy relationships would reveal its true nature. Like a vampire that cannot survive in sunlight, trauma bonding cannot coexist with the illuminating presence of genuine connection. The hermit archetype in Jung's work represents chosen solitude for the purpose of spiritual development, the conscious withdrawal from collective life to discover individual truth. But the isolation of trauma bonding is not chosen. It is compelled. It serves not individuation, but its opposite, the gradual dissolution of individual identity into the gravitational field of another's unconscious patterns. Friends stop calling because you are never available. Family members grow tired of competing with your consuming relationship for scraps of attention. Professional relationships suffer because your emotional energy is entirely devoted elsewhere. Slowly, imperceptibly, you become a ghost in your own life, present in body but absent in spirit, tethered not to your own center, but to the unstable orbit of another's psychological chaos. The mirage shimmers in the distance, always promising fulfillment just ahead, while behind you the real oases of connection grow smaller and smaller until they disappear entirely, leaving you alone in a desert of your own making, thirsting for the very nourishment you abandoned, in pursuit of a love that was never there at all. In the grand cathedral of false intimacy, there stands an altar where the soul bows before its greatest deception, the sacred confusion of intensity for intimacy, drama for depth, chaos for connection. Here in this shadow temple of the heart, the psyche performs its most elaborate ritual, the worship of feeling without meaning, passion without presence, fire without light. This is the paradox that ensnares countless souls in the web of trauma, bonding, the profound mistake of believing that the strength of feeling equals the depth of connection. The wounded psyche, starved for authentic intimacy, but terrified of its vulnerability, creates instead a magnificent theater of emotion so powerful, so overwhelming, so undeniably present, that it must surely be love's truest expression. But intensity is not intimacy any more than lightning is sunlight. Both illuminate, both command attention, both generate heat, yet one sustains life while the other burns it away. The trauma-bonded soul learns to crave the lightning, to find the steady warmth of authentic connection, somehow insufficient compared to the dramatic punctuation of emotional storms. Jung understood this as one of the ego's most sophisticated defense mechanisms against the genuine encounter with another human being. True intimacy requires the death of the false self, the dissolution of the persona's protective barriers, the terrifying vulnerability of being seen completely. But trauma bonding offers a clever substitute, the intoxicating experience of feeling deeply without the risk of being known deeply. Watch how the deception operates. The relationship becomes a perpetual crisis, a series of emotional emergencies that demand complete attention and generate profound feelings. There are breakups that feel like death, reconciliations that feel like resurrection, fights that tear the soul apart, and makings up that seem to stitch it back together with golden thread. The nervous system learns to interpret this constant activation as evidence of love's presence, mistaking the body's stress response for the chemistry of connection. But beneath this magnificent storm of feeling lies a desert of true knowing. You can spend years in the intensity of trauma bonding without ever truly being seen by your partner, without ever being asked about your deepest dreams, your childhood fears, your authentic desires. The emotional weather is so dramatic that it drowns out the quieter conversations where real intimacy is born, those gentle moments of curiosity, witnessed vulnerability, and mutual discovery. The unconscious creates this elaborate theater because genuine intimacy threatens the very patterns it seeks to maintain. If you were truly seen and accepted for who you are, the wounded child within would have to confront the devastating reality that love doesn't actually require suffering. If you experience genuine care and consistency, the traumatized psyche would have to release its grip on the familiar dynamics that have become its definition of connection. So instead, the shadow constructs relationships of magnificent intensity, but profound emptiness. You know every mood of your partner, every trigger, every way to make them angry or happy or jealous, but you don't know their dreams. You can navigate their emotional weather patterns with meteorological precision, but you've never seen them. Truly relax. You can manufacture passion through conflict and relief through resolution, but you've never experienced the quiet joy of simply being together without agenda or urgency. This is intimacy's evil twin. A connection so intense it feels like merger, but so shallow it never touches the true self. The ego mistakes the adrenaline of emotional drama for the dopamine of authentic bonding, the chaos of unpredictability for the depth of mystery, the exhaustion of constant crisis for the fulfillment of real love. The paradox deepens when you discover that this intensity, rather than bringing you closer together, actually creates more distance. Every emotional storm leaves debris that must be cleaned up, wounds that must be healed, trust that must be rebuilt. The relationship becomes so focused on surviving its own emotional weather that it never develops the calm spaces where genuine intimacy can flourish. Jung would recognize this as the compensatory function of the psyche gone wrong, the unconscious attempt to balance the absence of real connection through the excess of emotional activation. The more intimacy is lacking, the more intensity is generated. The less genuine seeing occurs, the more dramatic feeling is produced. The relationship becomes a perpetual motion machine of emotion, designed to distract from the fundamental emptiness. At its core, true intimacy whispers, trauma bonding screams. True intimacy asks questions, trauma bonding makes assumptions. True intimacy creates safety for vulnerability. Trauma bonding uses vulnerability as ammunition. True intimacy grows slowly, like a tree putting down deep roots. Trauma bonding burns bright and fast, like a forest fire that consumes everything in its path. The wounded soul becomes addicted to the intensity because it feels more real than the quiet rhythms of healthy love. Genuine care feels boring compared to the theatrical passion of trauma bonding. Consistent kindness feels flat next to the peaks and valleys of emotional chaos. The psyche learns to interpret the absence of drama as the absence of love, the presence of peace as the presence of disinterest. This is how the ego protects itself from the ultimate vulnerability, being truly known and chosen not for your performance, your intensity, your ability to generate feeling, but simply for the quiet truth of who you are beneath all the emotional theater. The shadow whispers that such acceptance is impossible, that you must earn love through the magnitude of your feelings, the drama of your devotion, the intensity of your need. But the paradox reveals its deeper truth. The more intensity you generate, the less intimacy becomes possible. The louder the emotional volume, the harder it becomes to hear the subtle frequencies of genuine connection. The more the relationship becomes about managing feelings, the less it becomes about sharing souls. The cathedral of false intimacy must eventually be abandoned, its altar of intensity left behind. Only in the quiet spaces beyond the storm can the soul discover what it has always been seeking, not the lightning of drama, but the steady sunlight of being truly seen, truly known, truly chosen, for nothing more or less than the beautiful ordinary miracle of who you actually are. The ego's theater of emotional intensity must close its curtains. The real performance, the gentle, vulnerable, infinitely more terrifying show of authentic intimacy, waits patiently in the wings, ready to begin only when the soul is finally ready to be seen without the costume of drama, without the makeup of crisis, without the script of suffering that has so long been mistaken for love's truest dialogue. In the ancient halls of alchemical wisdom, there exists a symbol so profound in its simplicity that it has captivated the human imagination for millennia. The Ouroboros, the serpent that devours its own tail in an eternal cycle of consumption and renewal. But in the shadow realm of trauma bonding, this sacred symbol becomes perverted into something far more sinister. A relationship that feeds upon itself, growing stronger through its own destruction, perpetuating its existence through the very conflicts that should signal its end. Here, in this psychological prison of circular time, the soul finds itself trapped in a ritualistic dance of rupture and repair that never truly heals, never truly resolves, never truly transforms. The same arguments rise from the depths of the unconscious like ancient gods demanding sacrifice. The same wounds split open with surgical precision. The same promises flow like honey from lips that have spoken identical words 1,000 times before. This is not the healthy spiral of growth that characterizes authentic relationships, where conflicts arise, get resolved, and create deeper understanding. This is the closed circle of compulsive repetition, where the psyche becomes trapped in a script written not by conscious choice, but by the inexorable pull of unhealed wounds, seeking their perfect expression. Jung understood this as the eternal return of the unconscious, the way traumatized patterns seek to complete themselves through endless repetition, believing that somehow, this time, the story will end differently. The wounded child within each partner carries the original script of betrayal, abandonment, or violation, and unconsciously choreographs each conflict to replay these primal dramas with meticulous precision. Watch how the Ouroboros operates in the realm of trauma bonding. The cycle begins with a period of relative calm, a false peace that feels like healing, but is actually just the serpent gathering strength for its next feast. Then comes the triggering event, often something so small that rational minds would dismiss it as insignificant, but rational minds are not in control here. The unconscious is directing this play, and it knows exactly which buttons to press to activate the ancient program. The argument that follows is never really about the present moment. It is about every time she felt unheard, every time he felt controlled, every time love turned to betrayal in the formative years, when their hearts were still learning what connection meant, the words that fly like arrows in the heat of conflict, dipped in the poison of ancient wounds, designed not to resolve, but to wound, not to heal, but to recreate the original trauma, with perfect fidelity. The fight escalates with the inevitability of Greek tragedy. Each partner knows their role perfectly, having rehearsed it countless times. One pursues, the other withdraws. One attacks, the other defends. One threatens to leave, the other pleads for forgiveness. The choreography is so precise that an outside observer might think they were watching a performance, and in many ways they would be right. But this is not conscious theater. This is the unconscious mind's desperate attempt to heal through repetition, to somehow get the story right this time, to finally receive the love that was denied in the original wounding. The argument becomes a ritual reenactment of childhood dynamics, with each partner playing multiple roles, sometimes the wounded child, sometimes the unavailable parent, sometimes the rescuer, sometimes the persecutor. The serpent devours its own tail when the conflict reaches its crescendo and begins to consume itself. The very intensity that feeds the fight eventually exhausts it. Harsh words are spoken that cannot be taken back. Boundaries are crossed that should never be violated. The relationship bleeds from wounds that are simultaneously fresh and ancient, new and endlessly familiar. Then comes the reconciliation, the serpent's tail beginning to regenerate, even as it is being consumed. The apologies flow like water after drought, carrying promises of change, vows of transformation, pledges that this was the last time, that now they understand, that love will conquer all. The wounded child in each partner cries out for this. Healing grasps at these promises like a drowning person reaches for driftwood. But the healing is superficial, a bandage placed over a gangrenous wound. The promises are sincere in the moment they are made, but they are promises made by the conscious mind, while the unconscious remains unchanged, still carrying the original script, still waiting for its next cue to begin the performance again. Chapter 4. Ouroboros reveals its cruelest truth. The very act of reconciliation plants the seeds of the next conflict. Each time the couple reunites without addressing the deeper patterns, they reinforce the cycle. The unconscious learns that the most reliable way to experience love is through the drama of loss and recovery, conflict and resolution, separation and reunion. The relationship becomes addicted to its own destruction and reconstruction. The partners learn to mistake the intensity of makeup sessions for genuine intimacy, the relief of reconciliation for authentic love, the temporary calm between storms for lasting peace. They begin to feel most alive, most connected, most in love precisely when they are in the process of destroying and rebuilding their bond. Jung would recognize this as the shadow's most sophisticated trap, the way unhealed wounds create relationships that feel deeply meaningful precisely because they are deeply destructive, the sole mistake, the familiar agony of repetitive conflict for the profound work of love. Not understanding that true love creates new patterns, rather than endlessly repeating old ones. The serpent grows fat on its own flesh, but it never truly nourishes itself. Each cycle of conflict and reconciliation leaves the relationship a little more depleted, a little more fragile, a little more dependent on the drama to feel real. The partners become like addicts, needing increasingly intense conflicts to generate the same rush of reconciliation, the same temporary high of feeling truly connected. The Ouroboros of repetitive conflict cannot be broken through more conflict, cannot be healed through more dramatic reconciliations. It can only be transcended when both partners recognize the ancient script they are following, acknowledge the childhood wounds that are writing their adult relationship, and choose consciously to step out of the circular dance of destruction and into the linear path of genuine healing. The serpent must release its own tail, must choose hunger over the illusion of nourishment, must face the terrifying prospect of linear time where growth is possible, where change is real, where love doesn't require the sacrifice of the self to feel authentic. Only then can the relationship escape the prison of repetitive conflict and discover what lies beyond the Ouroboros. The possibility of love that creates rather than consumes, that builds rather than destroys, that writes new stories rather than endlessly repeating the old ones. In the ancient language of the body, there exists a wisdom far older than conscious thought, a knowing that predates the ego's elaborate constructions and the mind's sophisticated rationalizations. This is the wisdom of the nervous system, that primordial sentinel that has kept our species alive through millennia of genuine threats. And when love becomes the source of chronic anxiety rather than peace, this ancient oracle begins to speak in symptoms that the conscious mind works desperately to ignore. Your body knows. Oh, how your body knows. While your mind spins beautiful stories about destiny and soulmates and love that transcends ordinary understanding, your nervous system sounds alarms that would make air raid sirens seem like whispers. The cellular memory of safety recognizes its opposite with pristine clarity, even as the wounded psyche insists that this trembling, this hypervigilance, this constant state of activation is simply the price of loving someone so deeply. Sleep, that sacred doorway between conscious and unconscious realms, becomes a battleground where anxiety wages war against rest. Your mind may tell you that you're simply excited about your beloved, but your nervous system knows the difference between the gentle anticipation of healthy love and the jagged activation of chronic threat. Night after night, you lie awake passing conversations for hidden meanings, analyzing glances for signs of withdrawal, rehearsing responses to conflicts that haven't yet occurred, but feel inevitable as sunrise. Jung understood that symptoms are the psyche's attempt to restore balance, to speak truths that consciousness refuses to hear. When the body rebels against what the mind insists is love, it is not being dramatic or oversensitive. It is performing its ancient function as guardian of the organism's well-being, the racing heart, the churning stomach, the shallow breathing, the muscle tension that never quite releases. These are not side effects of passionate love, but prophecies of a nervous system that recognizes patterns of threat disguised as intimacy. The appetite disappears, and with it the body's natural rhythm of nourishment and satisfaction. Food loses its appeal when the soul is chronically unsettled, when the digestive system is conscripted into service for fight or flight responses rather than the peaceful work of transformation and renewal. You may not consciously recognize the relationship as toxic, but your gut, that second brain, with its vast network of neurons, knows poison when it encounters it, even when that poison comes wrapped in proclamations of love. Watch how the body speaks its truth through 1,000 small rebellions your hands shake. When their name appears on your phone, not with excitement, but with the same tremor that accompanies genuine danger. Your breathing becomes shallow in their presence, not with the breathlessness of romance, but with the restricted breathing of anxiety. Your shoulders carry tension like armor, not the relaxed openness of trust, but the defensive posture of someone expecting attack. The conscious mind works overtime to reframe these signals, to transform the body's warnings into evidence of love's intensity. I get butterflies when I see them, you say, not recognizing that what you're experiencing is not the gentle flutter of attraction, but the frantic wing beats of a nervous system in distress. I can't eat when we're apart, you explain, not understanding that loss of appetite is the body's way of conserving energy for threat response, not evidence of romantic devotion. Jung recognized that true integration, the hallmark of psychological health, requires harmony between mind and body, conscious and unconscious, rational thought and somatic wisdom. But trauma bonding creates the opposite, a fundamental split where the mind insists on one reality while the body experiences another. Entirely, this dissociation allows the wounded psyche to maintain relationships that would be impossible if the full truth of their impact on the organism were acknowledged. The nervous system exists in a state of perpetual fight or flight, that ancient survival mechanism designed for brief encounters with mortal danger. But in trauma bonding, this emergency response becomes chronic, like a fire alarm that never stops ringing. Your adrenal glands work overtime, flooding your system with stress hormones meant for brief bursts of survival energy. Your immune system suffers under the constant assault of stress chemicals. Your digestion slows as resources are diverted to muscles prepared for conflict or escape. This is not the gentle stress of healthy challenge or the excited arousal of genuine attraction. This is the body's wisdom recognizing what the mind refuses to see, that love should not require the organism to exist in a constant state of emergency preparedness. True love creates coherence between all systems, heart, mind, body, and soul, working in harmony rather than in conflict. The shadow of anxiety's prophecy reveals itself in the quality of your dreams, those nightly journeys into the unconscious, where the day's experiences are processed and integrated. In healthy relationships, dreams tend toward resolution, integration, and peace. But in trauma bonding, the dream world becomes a battlefield where the psyche works frantically to process the daily assault of mixed messages, emotional chaos, and relational uncertainty. You wake exhausted not because you haven't slept enough, but because your unconscious has spent the night trying to make sense of contradictions that cannot be reconciled. How can something that feels so right feel so wrong? How can someone who claims to love you cause such distress? How can what the mind calls devotion feel to the body like danger? The body never lies because it cannot afford to lie. Its job is not to maintain romantic illusions or protect the ego's investments in particular relationships. Its job is to keep the organism alive and thriving. When love becomes a source of chronic anxiety, the body is performing its prophetic function, warning of danger, calling for attention, demanding that consciousness acknowledge what he would rather ignore. Jung taught that the psyche seeks wholeness, integration, the harmony of all its parts working toward the same goal. Trauma bonding creates fragmentation, where different parts of the self experience contradictory realities. The mind experiences love, while the body experiences threat. The ego experiences devotion, while the nervous system experiences danger. The persona experiences passion, while the immune system experiences assault. True love brings integration, mind and body aligned in recognizing safety, care, and mutual nourishment. The nervous system relaxes into patterns of rest and restoration. Sleep becomes restorative rather than elusive. Appetite returns as the body remembers that it is safe to be fully present, fully embodied, fully alive. The shadow of anxiety's prophecy calls us back to the fundamental truth. Love should feel safe in the body, not just beautiful in the mind. When your nervous system speaks its ancient warnings, listen. When your body rebels against what your mind insists is love, trust the deeper wisdom. The prophecy of anxiety is not a curse to be overcome, but a gift to be received. The body's loving attempt to guide you back to relationships that honor not just your heart's desires, but your organism's deepest need for safety, peace, and authentic nourishment. In the deepest chambers of the wounded psyche, there lives a phantom limb, not of flesh and bone but of soul and spirit. This is the phantom pain of feeling incomplete, the aching absence of something that was never truly missing, the desperate hunger for wholeness that can never be satisfied by another human being. Here, in this shadow realm of codependent fusion, the soul abandons its sacred journey toward individuation and instead becomes a beggar at the altar of another's being, seeking in external union what can only be found through internal integration. The phantom pain manifests as a chronic ache that seems to emanate from the very core of existence, a sense that something essential is missing, that you are fundamentally incomplete without the presence, attention, or love of another. This is not the gentle longing of one whole being for another, but the desperate grasping of a fragment seeking its missing piece. the compulsive need that masquerades as love, but is actually the ego's refusal to do the work of becoming whole. Jung understood this as the shadow side of the anima and animus, those inner masculine and feminine aspects that, when properly integrated, create wholeness within the individual psyche. But in trauma bonding, these internal dynamics are projected outward, creating the illusion that completion can be found through merger with another person. The wounded soul looks to its beloved to provide not just love, but identity, purpose, meaning, and the very ground of being itself. Watch how the phantom pain operates in the landscape of the heart. When your beloved is present, when their attention is focused on you, when their love flows in your direction, you experience a temporary cessation of the ache. The phantom limb stops hurting. The sense of incompleteness lifts like fog before sunrise. You feel whole, complete, real, as if you exist fully only in the reflection of their gaze, only in the warmth of their approval, only in the confirmation of their choice to be with you. But this relief is as temporary as it is intoxicating. The moment their attention shifts, the moment they turn inward or outward toward other concerns, the phantom pain returns with vengeance. The ache becomes unbearable, the sense of incompleteness overwhelming. You feel yourself literally fragmenting, as if your very existence depends on their presence, as if you are nothing more than a satellite in orbit around their sun, cold and lifeless when their light is turned away. This is not love. This is psychological dependency disguised as devotion. The soul, which was designed to discover its own wholeness through the sacred process of individuation, instead becomes addicted to the temporary relief of external completion. Like a drug addict seeking the next fix, you find yourself constantly maneuvering for their attention, constantly seeking reassurance of their love, constantly needing proof that you exist in their awareness. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming a whole, integrated individual, becomes impossible under these conditions. How can you discover who you truly are when your very sense of self depends on another's presence? How can you develop your own interests, your own opinions, your own spiritual connection when your identity is so thoroughly entangled with another's that you cannot tell where you end and they begin? The phantom pain creates a cruel paradox. The more you seek completion through another, the more incomplete you become. Each time you experience that temporary relief of feeling whole in their presence, you reinforce the neural pathways that tell you wholeness is impossible alone. Each time you feel the ache of separation, you strengthen the belief that you are fundamentally inadequate as a single entity. The wounded psyche becomes convinced that this desperate need is evidence of great love, that this inability to exist peacefully without another is proof of deep connection. "I can't live without them" becomes not a warning sign of unhealthy attachment, but a romantic declaration of ultimate devotion. The phantom pain is interpreted as the natural result of finding your other half, not recognizing that this very concept, that humans are incomplete without romantic partnership, is itself a wound masquerading as wisdom. True love, Jung knew, could only emerge between two beings who had done the work of becoming whole within themselves. When two complete individuals choose to share their completeness, they create a relationship that enhances rather than completes, that adds rather than fills, that enriches rather than saves. Each person remains tethered to their own center, while choosing to create a shared center together. But the phantom pain of incompleteness creates relationships of mutual rescue, where two drowning people drag each other deeper beneath the waves, while calling it love. Neither person can offer genuine support because both are desperately seeking it. Neither can provide solid ground because both are sinking in the quicksand of their own unhealed wounds. The addiction to external completion becomes so strong that the soul literally forgets how to exist independently. Time alone becomes intolerable because it brings face-to-face contact with the phantom pain, the aching sense of incompleteness that feels like death itself. Activities that once brought joy become meaningless without the beloved's presence to witness and validate them. The simple act of being alone with oneself, which should be the foundation of all healthy relationships, becomes a torment to be avoided at all costs. This is where the shadow reveals its deepest deception, convincing the soul that its natural state is incomplete, that wholeness is a luxury available only to those lucky enough to find their perfect match. The phantom pain becomes so familiar that it feels like home, so constant that it becomes invisible, so much a part of identity that imagining life without it feels like imagining life without breath. The wounded psyche cannot distinguish between the phantom pain of incompleteness and the genuine longing for connection that characterizes healthy relationships. It mistakes desperation for desire, neediness for love, codependency for intimacy. The soul becomes so accustomed to existing in a state of perpetual hunger that it cannot recognize nourishment when it appears. But the phantom pain is not permanent. It is a symptom of the soul's disconnection from its own wholeness. The missing piece is not another person, but the abandoned parts of the self, the disowned aspects of identity, the unlived potentials that were sacrificed in the name of seeking completion through another. Jung's path of individuation calls the soul back to its own center, back to the sacred work of becoming whole, not through union with another, but through integration of all aspects of the self. The phantom pain begins to heal when the soul stops seeking its missing pieces in external relationships and begins the archaeological work of recovering its own buried treasures. True love can only emerge when the phantom pain of incompleteness is healed, when two whole beings choose to share their wholeness, rather than two fragments seeking completion through merger. Only then can the soul discover that it was never actually incomplete. It was simply looking for itself in all the wrong places, seeking in the beloved what could only be found through the patient, tender work of learning to love the self completely. The phantom limb of the soul reveals its ultimate truth. What aches is not the absence of another, but the absence of the self from its own life. The completion you seek is not waiting in someone else's arms. It is waiting in the courageous embrace of your own becoming. In the deep chambers of the psyche, where love and fear dance their eternal waltz, there exists a crucible of transformation, so potent, so deceptive, that even the wisest among us may mistake its fire for warmth. Here, in this sacred vessel of human connection, control undergoes its most cunning metamorphosis, shape-shifting into the very appearance of love itself. Watch how the shadow works its ancient magic. See how it takes the raw material of our deepest terror, the primal fear of abandonment that lives in the marrow of every human bone, and transforms it into what appears to be its opposite. Jealousy dons the mask of devotion, its green eyes gleaming with what it claims is passionate love. "I cannot bear to lose you," it whispers, and in that whisper we hear not the voice of possession, but the song of the heart. Yet beneath this melody lies the deeper truth, the ego's desperate attempt to grasp what cannot be held, to own what can only be freely given. Possessiveness wraps itself in the cloak of protection, speaking in the language of guardianship. "I only want to keep you safe," it murmurs, as it builds invisible walls around the beloved, walls that grow higher with each passing day until they become a prison disguised as a sanctuary. The unconscious mind, driven by its ancient programming, convinces itself that to love is to contain, that to care is to control. It knows not that in seeking to protect the flower, it crushes the very petals it claims to cherish. And manipulation, how artfully it masquerades as care. It speaks in the tongue of concern, wears the face of nurturing, moves with the gestures of love. "This is for your own good," it says, as it slowly erodes the foundation of another's autonomy. I know what's best for you, it declares, as it replaces authentic choice with the illusion of care. The shadow has learned well how to use the language of love to serve the purposes of power. In this crucible of trauma bonding, we witness one of the most profound paradoxes of human relationship. Both souls become simultaneously the jailer and the prisoner, the controller and the controlled. Each believes themselves to be the victim of the other's power, yet each wields their own invisible chains. The one who appears to control is often the most controlled, bound by their own compulsions and fears. The one who seems powerless often holds the very power that the other so desperately seeks to possess. This is the elaborate dance of mutual enslavement, choreographed by wounds that have never seen the light of conscious awareness. Each partner moves to the rhythm of their own unconscious trauma, believing they dance with love when they are truly dancing with ghosts, the specters of past betrayals, abandonments, and violations that live on in the shadow realm of memory. Jung understood this dark alchemy well. He recognized how the unconscious, in its desperate attempt to heal old wounds, often creates new ones. The psyche that has known abandonment will do anything to prevent its return, even if that anything means sacrificing the very freedom that authentic love requires. It will trade the expansive sky of genuine intimacy for the cramped cage of control, believing that a love possessed is better than a love lost. But the shadow's attempt to achieve union through domination is doomed from its very conception. True union, the mystical marriage of souls that Jung called the conjunctio, cannot be forced or manufactured. It cannot be achieved through the mechanics of control or the strategies of manipulation. It emerges only in the fertile soil of mutual freedom, watered by the tears of vulnerable surrender. The shadow does not understand this sacred truth. It believes that if it can only control enough variables, manipulate enough outcomes, possess enough of the other's being, then love will be secure. It does not comprehend that love, like a wild bird, dies the moment it is caged. The very act of grasping kills what it seeks to hold. In the theater of trauma bonding, we see played out the eternal conflict between the ego's desire for security and the soul's need for freedom. The ego, terrified of loss, will sacrifice authenticity for the illusion of permanence. It will choose the known pain of limitation over the unknown joy of liberation. It will accept a counterfeit love rather than risk the vulnerability that genuine love demands. Yet even in this darkness, the light of consciousness can penetrate. Even in the depths of this mutual enslavement, the possibility of freedom remains. For when we begin to see the chains for what they are, not bonds of love but bonds of fear, we take the first step toward breaking them. When we recognize that our attempts to control another arise not from love, but from our own unhealed wounds, we open the door to genuine transformation. The alchemy of control disguised as care can be transmuted into something far more beautiful. The alchemy of love that sets free. But this requires the courage to face our own shadows, to acknowledge the ways we have confused possession with love, manipulation with care. It demands that we learn the difference between the ego's grasping and the heart's offering, between the shadow's domination and love's invitation to dance in the spaciousness of mutual freedom. Only when we release our death grip on control can we discover what it truly means to love, not as jailer and prisoner, but as two free souls choosing moment by moment to journey together through the vast mystery of existence.